I want you guys to come out to Lockhart, Texas, September 6th through the 8th of this year, and we are going to hang out. We are having our second annual Philip Ludwell III Orthodox Fellowship Conference, and check out this lineup of speakers. Alphonse Venn, Dr. Don Livingston, Father Filaret, Father Joseph Honeycutt, Jim Jatras, Ben Dixon, Father Peter Heers, Dr. Clark Carlton. We are also having a VIP reception where I will be doing a live broadcast of the Counterflow Podcast. My guests will be Father John Whiteford, Conrad from the World War Now podcast, Jim Jatras, and none other than the lady herself, Dissident Mama Rebecca, will be on with us as well. It's going to be a great time. Again, it's going to be September 6th through the 8th. It's our second annual Philip Ludwell III Orthodox Fellowship Conference. For more information, please go to southernorthodox.org and check out their events page. Come hang out. Let's do this.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. Although, as this airs, I am in Greece. I am at Mount Athos with a friend of the show, Peter Heers, Father Peter Heers, and Conrad from World War Now, and a bunch of us are over there. And one of the things I did not want to happen is to let this show lapse with no episodes. So I can tell you one thing, I am doing a video blog as I'm over in Mount Athos, and I'm going to at some point have an episode of all things Mount Athos and what we got into over there, what it was like. And keep me in your prayers, if you will, as this drops. I'm probably not in the live chat because the time difference is crazy and it's a spiritual pilgrimage that I'm part of. So keep me in your prayers. I will be praying for all of you. This show is my friend, close personal friend. I love him and his family. Matt Erickson, Mr. King-Pilled himself, is here. I hope as this drops that nothing crazy has happened because we recorded it and then it's like a week difference as it drops. I am out of town, of course, like I just mentioned. Who knows what's going to happen politically? But Matt's analysis on current events and politics is some of my favorite analysis. And I listened to his show that we're going to discuss, the Astrolabe. I like to call it Mornings with Matt, but I listen to it as much as I can on a very regular basis. I'm usually at the gym, which is funny. Sometimes I look around and I think, I wonder if anyone else is listening to something so niche, if you will. But anyway, maybe there's other Mornings with Matt listeners in my mega gym, if you will. Anyway, let's get to it right now. Friend of the show, friend in real life, Matt Erickson. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. I think this is the first one we've done one-on-one in a long time. It seems like I had you and Julie on before, you and Cooper on before, you and Jason on before. Finally, I get you to myself. And you've got the Astrolabe sunglasses and hat. Speaking of that, before we get into this, I've already given you an intro prior to here, but I'll let you talk about the projects you've got going on, what you do, and all of that, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah. So I'm sure most of your listeners are probably familiar with me. We've got like the Venn diagram of your audience and mine is probably, yours is larger, but it's probably like a circle.
It's close, yeah.
But Matt from King-Pilled is a YouTube channel, the podcast. But started up a new show recently on the King-Pilled channel. Actually, it's been almost 3 months now, which is hard to believe. But doing the Astrolabe is what it's called. And it's a morning show as often as I can get it done in the morning. Live stream 2 or 3 hours going through whatever funny videos or tweets or a variety show, I guess, is like a variety news show. So that's where I spend the most time. And then on Twitter at Real King-Pilled, I like to tweet my thoughts. And Twitter is basically the town square. It's where all the news happens. It's where everything gets discussed. It's where all the trends. If the trends don't start on Twitter, they show up there very early on, and you see how they're going to flesh out. You can kind of track them. The way they spread throughout Twitter is kind of like a foretaste of how they're going to spread throughout the rest of society. So I've been on there for probably 15 years now and watched the rise and fall of all these different things. So I spend a lot of time there. And to me, it's more than just, I'm going to be on social media and just kind of waste some time. It's actually like trying to keep track of what's happening and who's doing and saying what, and what major people are signaling this way or that way. And so it's a place I spend a lot of time.
Yeah, I used to think of it as it was like not late breaking. It was like early breaking news where sometimes you'd find out there before the real news. And now also I think of it as like, this is literally where the news starts and then stuff happens in the rest of culture. And my recent example would be the quote unquote resignation letter of Joe Biden. I was like, no one would know about this except it's a tweet.
Yes.
And so there's, people even in our circles like Twitter's not real life. And it was like, well, no one would know that quote unquote Joe Biden resigned except for Twitter. And I'm still not sure what to think about that. I do like that you talked about Venn diagrams between your show and my show. You know who else likes those?
I was wondering if you were going to pick up on that.
Yeah. And I want to get into that because I think you and I are on the same page on this. And Aaron McIntyre is on the same page as we are. Dave Smith is on this. I've heard Dave Smith talk about this specifically with Tucker and then on his own show. I could not agree with him more because this whole Kamala Harris thing is so fake, so absurd. Like, I can't think of enough silly things to even call it, but I'm just not going for it. I'm not falling for it. I'm not black-pilled by it. It's just stupid. She's not likable. She's not smart. The whole thing's astroturfed. And I guess I was going to ask you something else first, but since you mentioned the Venn diagrams, what do you think? Talk about this insane deluge of the most weak Kamala Harris propaganda, the most weak propaganda I've seen in maybe my lifetime, but specifically about her, and then we'll get to her VP pick in a minute.
Yeah. What are the great things about this current era and in world history is the term astroturfed has become pretty much mainstream. There's a lot of people now generally have an awareness of it. They've heard it. And that's a good thing because once you have a mouth sound that you can attach to a mind picture, then you can think about and talk about that mind picture. So the concept of astroturfing, where you make a story seem grassroots when it's actually very fake. It's not organic. It's being planted. This is Kamala's entire campaign. Her entire everything. It was really for Biden as well. And that's part of why the term has become more and more normalized. But it's entirely the very definition of trying to make something look organic that is completely inorganic. There's been numerous ostensible DNC party loyalist demographics recently who have been coming out on TikTok and on Twitter and various different platforms and saying the Kamala Harris campaign offered me $10,000 to make a video or to make videos promoting her, but they asked me to sign an NDA. So they want me to make it seem organic. Like, I'm so excited about Kamala. I've got my really big audience of people, and I'm going to talk to this audience of people and push them in Kamala's way and make it seem like Kamala is well liked and popular. And there's so much you can learn just from the admission of doing that shows the way that the people who are doing it shows what they think. Like, for example, the posting of Joe Biden's quote unquote resignation letter on Twitter, it shows you, number one, the significance of Twitter. It also shows you who was doing it, like what demographic of people was doing it. Because there are still certain demographics in power who wouldn't necessarily think, I'm going to go post the news on Twitter first. I'm not going to, if it was, let's put it this way. If it was older people who were like seasoned DC veterans who have been there for a couple decades, they wouldn't be like, let's just pull up a blank white sheet of paper and write a thing on it and forge his signature on it, which in 2024 is so odd. You're telling me you don't have a digital version of his signature,
right?
That DocuSign or whatever that you could just plug in there. You can't go like take something else he's signed and just crop out the signature and plop it in there. You have to forge the signature. It's such incompetence.
Yes, these aren't even. This is worse than the fake IDs when I was attempting to look like I was 21.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like it would be kind of the equivalent of if you had a fake ID and you were trying to get into a bar and you just took like an actual driver's license of someone else and you just taped paper over it and like drew sort of a design that looked like the ID. Where it's like, okay, you tried to make this look official, but there's nothing official about it. So that tells you who the people were. I don't mean the exact persons, but I mean the type of person, the demographic of person that did that. This is something that's being run through, at the very least, at the very oldest, a bunch of millennials.
Right.
If not Zoomers, because there's plenty of them that are around her at this point as well, which is a little weird to think about. But yeah, the whole thing is very, it's very obviously fake. And you would know this just knowing Kamala Harris's history. There's no way someone goes from one of the worst performing, most unpopular politicians of all time, who wasn't even in contention for president in 2020, even though she was running for it, and she had a big campaign blitz behind her back then as well. She was wildly unpopular. I think she got like 800 something votes in 2020. Like that's the most number of people she could get. Like they basically paid 800 people to vote for her in 2020.
I got more than that for my city council run in Lockhart, just so you guys understand that. So from Lockhart, you got more than 800 people than she got from the entire nation. This is how wildly unpopular this woman is. And you can tell anytime you see her, if you happen to catch an interview of her, because she's all of a sudden not doing any of them. And in 2020, they were like, okay, we could do the Joe Biden in the basement thing and get away with it because it's 2020. There's a really easy story. What? You don't want the old man out during COVID? Are you a COVID denier? You don't even wear a mask, do you? That's the response that you would get if you tried to challenge it in 2020. Now it's like, there's nothing. They don't even have a pretext for it. So they're trying to run the same playbook, but it's a different game. So there's just no possible way that you could ever conceivably believe this woman is popular. Right.
But she, for whatever reason, is the one that they, whoever they are backing at all costs, it seems, which I happen to believe. I'm holding on to this. I don't think she's going to be I needed to modify what I was saying to actually capture exactly what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be a challenger ticket. I don't know what's going to happen with that challenger ticket, but I don't think that this is just going to be a sweep into the DNC and just be like Trump was at the RNC. I don't think the entire regime coalition has cemented itself behind her. And there's a number of different things that have popped up recently that have kind of reconfirmed that to me. So I think we're in for a very interesting DNC, and it's TBD whether or not Kamala winds up actually being the nominee. Walz is a guy that there's public conversation about him having to resign because he's been just absolutely ridden in scandal ever since his name was announced. I know you wanted to bring up the VP next. So yeah, the whole ticket is just about as fake as it can get.
There's I don't want to speak too in the weeds or over the heads of people listening, but there's an Austrian economist that Matt and I both know named Bob Murphy. Did you see Bob's tweet about this? He echoed the same sentiments. Now CNN's running, of all places, running a headline about how her economic stimulus or whatever she was calling it was obviously backwards and absurd and won't work. And they were calling her out. And Bob said, she's not going to be the nominee, is she? And so that sentiment is growing. And just so people understand, the AstroTurf thing is not, we're not saying that because she's a Democrat or a liberal and we don't like her. Obama was not AstroTurf. That was legit grassroots. Bernie Sanders has had legitimate grassroots. And then people that Trump obviously has had legitimate grassroots. I think a great example would be Ron Paul, which I was part of that grassroots. That was all like real popular support that you could not get away from. And one of the ways I used to recognize that, like the Ron Paul crowd and the Trump 2016 crowd, and now 2024 crowd, kind of owned the comment section and everything that was posted. And if you go look at anything the DNC posts, anything Kamala HQ posts on social media, it's inundated with the opposite. it's people that are calling her out, that are hating on her. There's no massive swell underneath this movement. And really, well, let's get into Tim Walz real quick. I heard an episode of Tom Wood's show where a gentleman was discussing from Minnesota. I honestly, maybe this is my own ignorance, living under a rock, I didn't know who Tim Walz was.
I didn't either.
Okay. I mentioned that in one thread under him, and people are like, what are you, an idiot? But I didn't know. Yeah, maybe I am. I didn't know who he was. I don't follow Minnesota politics except for when it was burning. And so I did kind of, for troll purposes, under some of his fan sites, go under and say, oh man, he must have replaced whatever horrible governor that was during 2020 that was governor of Minnesota, because obviously that guy sucked. But what are your thoughts on what I would call the ultimate cuck in Tim Walz?
I had to run an errand this weekend. I drove up to Oklahoma City from San Antonio area where I live. And I was on the voice chat on my Discord I have a King Pill Discord where a bunch of the most loyal fans hang out. And we were on the voice chat discussing the Peter Thiel, Joe Rogan conversation that had just dropped. Mm-hmm. And someone said something about Walz having monkeypox. And I was like, no, this is some simulation stuff. Walz, the guy who is the I don't know what I can say without like getting myself in legal trouble or something. There are a lot of very strange things about his background and his relationship to young men and the types of historical and political movements that he wants to align himself with, and his whole behavior. And then he comes out on the stage multiple times at these fake rallies that they've been doing, because you can tell they're fake because occasionally a picture will leak out that shows how carefully crafted the behind the shot is, and it's basically like half media and then half people actually there. So these are very low attended rallies, unless they happen to coincide the rally with a Megan Thee Stallion concert, mm-hmm. in which case people show up for the concert and then leave during the political rally part. But he comes out on stage and he's like dancing around like a total queen. He's like waving with both hands, and he's high-fiving or handshaking his wife on mm-hmm. stage, mm-hmm. which is just very, very odd behavior from what seems to be a very, very odd guy. It turns out he didn't actually have monkeypox. It was a brilliant troll which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it began from our little corner of Twitter. Spread the rumor that he had monkeypox, and it went viral. And I'll be very interested to see. Yeah. What's that?
No pun intended, of course.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'll be very interested to see if there's if he winds up having to answer to that or something, because they said he was going to be traveling back and isolating himself, and that he was already vaccinated and boosted, which should have been a cue that it wasn't real, because if there was a monkeypox vaccine that was available for everyone to be vaccinated and boosted by, we would very much be aware of it at this point. But he's very, he seems like a true believer. Kamala mm-hmm. is just an opportunist.
Yes.
Who is there for the power and the attention, and she's there to just get drunk all day and be able to go around and have a couple conversations and then fly on an Air Force Two and just kind of fill the halls of power with her presence. Walz seems like he's a genuine true believer. He's like Bernie Sanders, but less harmless. Because Bernie Sanders is kind of is just, I don't know. Bernie Sanders is a true believer, but he's like a sincere person. He's just really, really off the rails. Yes. Walz strikes me as legitimately like bloodthirsty evil. And that's mm-hmm. the way he governed in Minnesota, and the fact that they would even pick him as a VP is, I think, again, points to the types of people who are running the show right now. That within 24 hours of him announcing, he was inundated in scandals and has been inundated in scandal the entire time. The stolen valor thing is going to be, if he remains the VP, the stolen valor thing is probably going to do the ticket in, because that's a big enough issue to enough people in an election that the way the voting is going to pan out, we'll say that the way the reporting of the voting is going to pan out, it's going to be very tight among very tightly contested and determined among, 50 to 100,000 votes in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And the stolen valor thing is not going to play well there. So again, the astroturfing thing, you talked about the authenticity that you could see the actual organic support. And I will say that politics in general, electoral politics, especially at this point now, I think once upon a time, this may not have been the case, but especially at this point now, it is a game of astroturfing, like political campaigning and campaign spend, advertising, all of this stuff is by definition, you're trying to astroturf something. You're trying to take something that's small and make it much bigger. The question is whether it's entirely astroturfed, right, or if it's there's something to work with there. And in this case, there's nothing to work with there. You're always going to have the segment of the population that will vote blue no matter who. Yes. And that's all that their campaign has just been pandering to the vote blue no matter who crowd. In the last couple of weeks, they've started branching out and picked a couple of the most popular policies among their vote blue no matter who crowd that Trump has talked about, like no tax on tips. And there was another one. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head. But she's picked them up. And so the child tax credit. JD Vance talked about a $5,000 tax credit. She said we're going to do a $6,000 tax credit. But these are things that are kind of empty promises that they can easily make that are going to maybe have a little bit of broader appeal to non-engaged voters, but are largely just about continuing to maintain that vote blue no matter who crowd, which is not the crowd that they need to appeal to by definition. You're literally preaching to the choir. And sometimes the choir needs to be preached to, but in a presidential campaign, in order to win, ostensibly, gotta have the asterisk there. In order to win, you need to be able to appeal outside of your core demographic. So, and I think there's things we can learn about the fact that they're only appealing to those people. They're not actually trying to reach outside their own demographic. And I don't think that this is, some people want to give the black pill take on this, that it's like, oh, they already know they've got it all sealed up and they don't even have to try. And so they're just going to, this doesn't make sense. The people don't function that way. You're not going to go talk to someone from some loyal staffer of Kamala's campaign, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to fix the election. It's already going to be all taken care of. No, they're not thinking that way. They're like, holy crap, we need to make sure we get people out to vote, and we need to track all the numbers and stuff. Like, that's how they're going to be thinking. I think the fact that they're pursuing such an incompetent strategy is evidence of their incompetence. Mm-hmm. They don't know what they're doing. They're people who have only existed in a bubble and they're just young, ignorant people.
I have to tell you about something to help you out. The world's largest offshore event taking place entirely online. You hear that, online, from October 7th through 11th. It's going to be put on by our friend Mikkel Thorop, host of the Expat Money Show, the highly sought after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. In this offshore event online, like we said, you will discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You will learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B. We all should have that. Maybe plan C, plan D, and so on. How to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. And these are the actual real experts, not the experts kind that we've been promised to trust. Headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, friend of the show Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo. A lot of those names have been on this show, so you guys are going to want to tune into this online, like we said, October 7th through 11th. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That is expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show. You mentioned Peter Thiel earlier. I know he was on with Joe Rogan recently. In let's say, I hate this term, it's such a podcast term, but for lack of a better phrase, elevator pitch, will you quickly hit on, and you've done it many times on many platforms, the PayPal Mafia? Because I learned of it from you, and you guys were talking about it months and months and months ago. And I thought then, and you guys kind of alluded to this, if JD Vance is the pick, then that's somewhat of a clear sign that the PayPal Mafia is basically helping direct Trump's administration, well, his campaign now and then his administration as it will be. So can you kind of give an elevator pitch of what the PayPal Mafia is and how that connects with JD Vance and then Trump as well?
Yeah, so the PayPal Mafia was a term that pre-existed me. There was actually a Wikipedia entry for PayPal Mafia when I started digging into it in, I think it was January of this year. And we've used it as kind of a shorthand for talking about this phenomenon of significant figures within Silicon Valley, who you might call the tech bros or the tech titans or something along those lines. They have broken from the regime coalition. The regime is made up of a coalition of different interests that all come together. They see, you could think of it as like the old, when you had like a king with a bunch of lords. The king was supported by his lords because his lords would come together. They would all like bring their sovereignty in and put it into a pool. And the king was the one who controlled that pool of sovereignty that they had all put into. And at any point, if a sufficient number of the lords decided to withdraw their sovereignty from the king's goose was cooked. So it's the system we have now from a 50,000 foot view is exactly the same, except instead of it being like an actual lord, it's more like a coalition of people, that it's a coalition of different interests. So you can think of if you have if you imagine like the flow chart from the king down through the noblemen, the lords, and everything. It just take that exact same structure, but zoom out a lot. And then each little node in that structure, instead of being an individual person, it's like an individual company or an individual group of people. And the PayPal Mafia has constituted a large swath of that coalition in terms of money and influence and power. This isn't to say this isn't like every single person in Silicon Valley. There's plenty of Silicon Valley people who are hardcore on the Kamala train at this point, and will continue to be, because their power has depended upon leaning on the federal government and paying off regulators and such to advance their own company's interests or their industry's interests. So there's a whole bunch you can. I really strongly recommend a conversation between Balaji Srinivasan and Vivek Ramaswamy that dropped last week, and then there's another one. And I wish I had the name of the podcast. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But Balaji, if you look up Balaji Srinivasan on YouTube, it's one of his more recent ones. It was like a 3-hour stream that he did with a guy from India, giving a complete outsider a breakdown of American politics. And he details really well the way you went from legacy press to tech, the tech companies, and how they kind of were in battle with each other, and then sort of came to like a détente and worked together. But there's always been a little bit of hostility there. There's always, like, Facebook has always been the subject of relentless abuse from the legacy press, which is kind of odd from our perspective, because it's like these seem to be two parts of the same coalition, but they are, but they're also not the same part of the coalition. They are two different parts because they have ultimately diverging interests, but they agree to combine their interests for the sake of certain things. What's happening now is the regime has cultivated a competency crisis. It's been like an explicit policy of theirs to attack every single thing that could possibly promote competency. Any sort of meritocracy, family structure, the state of the money, the education system, all these different things have been just relentlessly attacked for decades. And this competency crisis has now hit the regime itself, as evidenced in the Kamala campaign. The people who are running the show are increasingly detached from reality and more incompetent. And key members from this so-called PayPal Mafia they may not necessarily be completely hip to viewing the world the way we do. They don't share all of our fundamental values necessarily, and although some of them are a lot closer than you might think. And the competency thing is a really big deal to them for a variety of reasons. Number one, the immigration problem, the illegal immigration problem, they recognize objectively what this is, how destabilizing this is. And they want a powerful, secure, stable American political entity, because their own ability to innovate and to grow in terms of prosperity, and to grow in terms of moving away from the earth as a place of for where humans exclusively occupy. These things all depend upon having a solid foundation. And they see the degradation of what's happening to the country economically, politically, socially, culturally, in the labor markets, the capital markets. Everything that is breaking at the seams, and they don't want that to happen because they want to be able to use the United States to accomplish the things that they want to do in terms of technological innovation and growth off of the planet. Which I don't necessarily. I agree with generally the technological innovation and growth off the planet. I think I'm not opposed to them in principle. I also, they shouldn't be a god in and of themselves. But anyway, so we began recognizing that there was something bubbling underneath the surface, that as a sufficient number of these tech guys from Silicon Valley, venture capitalists, CEOs, founders, they were all starting to kind of get pretty restless and sending some signals that they were dissatisfied with the current state of the Democrat Party, and they were willing to play ball with Trump because he happens to see as major issues a lot of the things that they're concerned about, namely crypto, AI remaining open source, not allowing regulatory capture for like Google and Facebook and a couple of the major companies. That really is a big issue. The open source versus closed source AI is a very big concern. The closed source side says, well, if we let AI just do its thing, then Skynet is going to emerge from the machines, and we're going to live in the Terminator universe. And so what we need to do is we need to really ratchet down control and regulation over the industry to prevent people from doing evil things with it. It ties in very closely to the social media censorship thing. If we allow people to just do whatever they want, then bad things are going to happen. So we need to prevent people from doing whatever they want. Well, that becomes a vehicle for regulatory capture. And that's how you actually get Skynet, because you create the nanny state to try to prevent the AI monster from emerging, and you become the AI monster you were trying to prevent. So that's like an existential issue to these guys, as well as the relationship to China. They don't want China to beat us in the AI race. And if they're hostile to China, then that's going to bring up the illegal immigration thing, because China is absolutely involved in that and promoting and pushing that because it weakens and destabilizes us. They're using the illegal immigration thing in cooperation with the cartels to bring fentanyl across the border. And they maintaining their human trafficking networks. All these things begin implicating each other. And the signal that it sends is the people who have been in charge need to be moved out of the way. And this is no longer just a matter of political disagreement. This is an existential problem. We will not have a country left if we don't address these issues. The last big issue would be the reshoring of American manufacturing and reindustrialization, because everything has been offshored. But that means now if shit hits the fan, then we aren't able to protect our own interests because we depend upon all these global supply chains. And we saw with COVID just how easily those things cracked and fell apart, and how everything started to hit the fan overnight. So we need to reindustrialize a lot of this. And then adding to that would be Ukraine and Israel and what's happening there. And these guys land really pretty evenly on both sides, maybe even more on the pro-Ukraine, pro-Israel side in general. But the bigger thing is they're not Zionists. Overwhelmingly, they're not Zionists, because Zionist has a very specific meaning. This is driving me crazy. People are calling them Zionists or neoconservatives. Being willing to use the military does not make you a neoconservative. Wanting Israel to exist does not make you a Zionist. Being sympathetic to Israel doesn't make you a Zionist. Zionist is a very specific thing. And when you water it down, you make it harder to see what being a Zionist actually is, which I think is very important, because I think it's probably the worst influence on American politics. So they need to, the way that I've framed it is that there's kind of two camps. That the thing that has driven them apart from the regime coalition and created this second camp that is now throwing in with Trump is there's the regime side would be Israel must exist so that, the United States must exist so that Israel can exist. The other side would be the United States must exist and Israel must exist. They believe both should, but that they should be separate, standalone entities and they should be strong allies and yada, yada, yada. obviously that becomes a vehicle for more Zionist influence down the road. But there is no force in American politics right now that's powerful enough, that's going to rally enough elite support to completely eliminate Zionist influence from the United States. It's just not, it's not on the menu right now. Maybe it will become on the menu, but these guys are these guys are the closest thing to political allies that we're going to see in the near term future. So as I was beginning to track all this, I realized this is much longer than an elevator pitch.
That's all right.
But as I was beginning to track all of this, I saw the connection then between Peter Thiel, who would be, if there is a sort of Machiavellian behind the scenes actor who recognizes all of these same things that we do, that we talk about, that we're concerned about, that we value, who is actually moving in a really calculated, very, very self-conscious manner to take over the regime's power structures, it would be Peter Thiel. We've done a lot of discussion about him, but one of his proteges is J.D. Vance. He's the one who funded J.D. Vance's Senate run, got him elected, and there's been a lot of conversation this year about how Peter Thiel has withdrawn his support from Trump. He's not getting involved in any of the election cycle this year, and just because the man wasn't putting money into it didn't mean that he wasn't involved. If anything, it's more that he's withdrawn himself so that he can operate more through proxies. So after the Trump assassination attempt, this was just leaked or announced within the last week or so. Peter Thiel was one of the handful of people who was calling Trump and openly advocating for him to take on J.D. Vance as his VP. So that was we'd suspected that. When it happened, we were like, okay, this is probably a pretty strong signal that we were right about everything. And then, yes, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, David Sachs, and there was at least one other person I can't think of off the top of my head, were some of the biggest members of this PayPal mafia. In fact, those three, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and David Sachs, are probably the three most well-known members of the actual PayPal mafia, whose names are at the top of the Wikipedia page for it. Mm-hmm. They were the ones who were telling Trump, like, take on J.D. Vance as your VP. He's your insurance policy. And if you have him, you have us, which brings with it a tremendous amount of wealth and power and political connections. And so it's the largest defection from the regime that we've seen in our lifetimes easily.
Yeah. Talk about and again, I'm not trying to talk down to my audience, but there's always people that write in and say, I didn't know what you meant during this. And I understand a lot of people do know certain things. People, I don't want to get too internet buzz phrase, but the circulation of the elites, what Trump represents in sort of this picture with the PayPal mafia backing him versus also, let's say he picked, I don't know, Marco Rubio or Tim Scott rather than J.D. Vance, what that path would have looked like, what the path looks like now, and then detail the circulation of the elites as it affects all of that.
So the circulation of the elites is a phrase that came from Vilfredo Pareto, who is one of the guys that James Burnham covers in the Machiavellians. I think it's called the Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. And this is a book that kind of became all the rage in our circle here from people who listened to Mencius Moldbug, who is then revealed publicly as Curtis Yarvin. During the whole post-libertarian moment that I know your audience will be very familiar with, this was a lot of those of us who were called the post-libertarians. These were the things that we were reading. So Vilfredo Pareto detailed how society always breaks into, human society always breaks into broadly two camps. You have the elites and the non-elites. And then the elites themselves are broken themselves into two camps, the governing elites and the non-governing elites. And then elites themselves also have two different broad categories of, you might say, like behavioral personality, which is the foxes and the lions. The foxes rule through combinations, he says, which is they're sort of like sneaky and subversive, and they're trying to, instead of dealing with hard power directly up front, they're trying to use soft power and be more withdrawn and sort of combine or stack things to work at a distance versus just confronting something head on. When fox elites are in power, they tend to build out more broad bureaucratic structures. So it's a much more of a horizontal spread in terms of distribution of power. Whereas lions tend to be much more hierarchical and use smaller organizations, and they're much more comfortable with the use of force. And then there's values that are associated with the lions that would be, like patriotism, and they tend to be more conservative, and they value existing structures, and they want to use them, and they want to be efficient. So we've been ruled by foxes for a very long time, and there's a lot of reasons for that you could probably fill a number of podcasts with. But I would say ethnic or demographic reasons for that. But the lions have been basically shoved out of polite society for a while. Anybody who's willing to use force or wants to use force is automatically viewed with fear and suspicion. The problem is, if you have a single set of elites who operate in one specific way, and it stays that way for a long time, eventually that coalition, that power structure, is going to begin to ossify. It's going to get brittle and stiff and begin to break down. You need to have a circulation of personality and ideas, and literal people need to be circulating through the elite classes to keep them strong and flexible and supple and adaptable, and not so beholden to corruption. But we've been conditioned to believe that anybody who wants to use power, anybody who wants to use direct action, that is by definition corrupt. So if you don't get a circulation of the elites, eventually you're going to reach a revolution. And the way that revolution is going to bear out is that a certain section of the elites is going to break away from the rest of them. They're going to appeal in like populist or demagogic terms to the masses, and weaponize the masses against the elites that they're seeking to overthrow, so that they can supplant them and become the new elites. So with that understanding that this is just a never-ending cycle in human social evolution, we began looking for a potential elite defection. So we have our elite governing class. Are there going to be people who either go from non-governing elites and actually begin to step into the arena and vie to be a governing elite, or are we going to get current governing elites that abandon the regime coalition and begin operating and working against them? Trump was the first signal of something like this happening. You could go back a little further, and there was maybe a few other signs before that of these sorts of things bubbling up. But for example, Ron Paul's success depended upon there being some measure of elite backing or elite support for what he was doing. There was somebody there. There was some people there who had money or influence or social networks or whatever that they could use to promote him. Otherwise, he would never have gotten off the ground. It's a requirement to be politically successful in any sort of democratic or Republican type of government that you have elite support. That is going to dictate whether or not you're ever successful. And I would say that probably would qualify for any governmental system whatsoever. The idea of a grassroots thing, we have these legends of the plucky upstarts who started a revolution, and they brought all the people together, and by the sheer force of their will, they overthrew the powers that be. It never happens that way. That's the mythology that is told in retrospect, but it's always a matter of slicing off some section of the elite class that's disaffected from the current core and weaponizing them against it.
If it happened that way, Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee.
Yes.
In 2020. That was the perfect example of why that does not work. He did have the grassroots. He did have the quote unquote revolutionary support, if you will, and the elite said no.
Yes, right. And it was honestly kind of a bit of a presage for what was to come, in that the way that the elite said no was not like, it wasn't shut down behind the scenes. It really burst out into the forefront, and they had to use a really sneaky fox-like strategy to cut him off. So that also tells you there was significant elite support behind him as well. And we were already starting to see the civil war happening within the Democratic Party. So that was a great example of how foxes wield power. The way that we're going to prevent you from coming to power is by changing the rules at the last minute, so that we're going to create this category called superdelegates, and the superdelegates can basically vote to overwhelm the non-superdelegates. That's a very fox-like strategy. So Trump is just about the apotheosis of lion energy. Everything, his rhetoric, his demeanor, the very bombastic, very tending toward conservative and strong, masculine. All of these things are all very lion-like. And then his desire or willingness to use power, to use force, not like shy away from it. Like, yeah, we're going to hit you in the mouth. But we're not going to get into these like super long, protracted, drawn out battles. If we go to battle, we are going to absolutely obliterate you first thing, and then seek a resolution of the fight, because it's not efficient or productive to make these things drag out. If you're going to get in a fight with someone, you want to knock them out with the first punch. You don't want to have to go back and forth for round after round after round after round. Unless you're someone who quite literally, like if you're someone who's betting on the fight and you're betting that the fight is going to end in the 8th round, well then, yeah, you want it to go round after round after round. But if you're the person in the fight, you don't. So Trump represented the rise of Trump represented the return of lion style government to or governance, I'll say, or style of government. That was when Trump really burst onto the scene, was the sign that this circulation of the elites was going to happen. Like, it's going to happen. It's a matter of when and how, not if, because so much of it is out in the open now. There's so much thirst for a change. There's enough people, for whatever reason, who want to see. They're just dissatisfied with the economy. They're dissatisfied with their own lives. They're dissatisfied with the culture. Whether it's because they think it's not degenerate enough or they think it's too degenerate, they want to change. So there's going to be a change. The regime is screwed. It's a question of whether the regime is going to be basically sold off for parts and chopped up into a much more radically communist manifestation of power, or if it's going to be reappropriated to a more traditionalist, conservative leaning angle. And I do think that if you're an accelerationist, if you're someone who wants this to just get over with as soon as possible and you don't care what the body count is going to be, then you would be a black pillar. Like that would be the black pill perspective. You fuck it all, just break it and just kill it. Just dead. And we want it to die and crash and burn as much as possible. And if it means that 70% of human population is wiped out, so be it. There's no price too expensive to pay. I do think that the Trump side of things is the moderate way. It's much closer to the actual regime, ironically enough, because they want to maintain stability. They want to try to maintain stability and then try to grow up from that. Well, that's very different from tearing it down to the studs and then rebuilding it. So, but I think this is probably a necessary deal with the devil, if you want my opinion on it. I think you don't want to set out on any course of action that says we're going to kill tons and tons of people with this, but it's going to be worthwhile. I think that anytime you're starting off with millions will die or billions will die, but I don't like that rationale. Right. So if there's a way to forestall that in any way, then I think you have to take that.
What does he represent to you, Trump, as far as where we're at now? And again, I think had he picked Tim Scott or Marco Rubio or what I would call a fossil of the old system, I think we're having a different conversation, but he did not. And I don't know, again, I suppose it was some of these people in his ear. I think Tucker Carlson had a part to play in this as well. What does Trump represent as he is now with where things are moving forward?
So yeah, Tucker was one of the people lobbying for Vance, and also Vance is really close friends with Donald Trump Jr. So Jr. was in his ear on it as well. I had said for a while there when people were kind of like, who's his VP going to be? And there's so many choices and nobody could quite triangulate who it's going to be. And he's come out and made some weird statements where it seems almost like he's not the one dictating who his VP is going to be. And my theory had been in building up this PayPal Mafia theory was the fight over his VP was going to dictate just to the extent to which he was going to be truly a counter regime candidate. The neocons, the Con Inc. wing of the Republican Party had their candidate that they wanted him to take. That would be Mike Pence 2.0, basically a containment mechanism for him. And then this upstart coalition, which would be like the new right, it would be large segments of Wall Street, ironically enough, major defense and Pentagon interests, because it turns out that what Moldbug called Red America, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, they're not wholly given over to all of the wild State Department degeneracy, hanging the trans flag from the American embassy type of stuff. There's plenty of legitimate military interests that are like, we need to be competent. We're eliminating our ability to even field a military that can compete on the world stage. And that's a major concern. That's a major national security concern. But those guys can't just come out and like release a press release about it, or they're going to get hunted down and have their careers ruined. So they have to operate behind the scenes in secret, which is kind of, as I think about it, it's kind of a funny phenomenon where you've got lion archetypes. You've got like military leaders you would think are kind of, you want those to be your lions, and they're having to act like foxes, sneaking around behind the scenes. But so you had the old guard's candidate, which was, it sounds like, I think it was going to be Marco Rubio. I think it was confirmed that he was the pick, actually. That's how close it came. When the assassination attempt happened, the VP pick changed. And one of the things that motivated that, I believe, was Tucker Carlson, because he said he told Trump, if you pick Marco Rubio, you will die. There's no question about it. They will kill you, because then they have their guy. This is the way that they bypass the election. You can have your election or whatever, but then we just knock you off. And now you have President Marco Rubio, who becomes the old Republican Party all over again. And he would be he doesn't have the singular intestinal fortitude that Trump does. Trump is in his kind of bombastic belligerence. He can be very difficult to control. There's been a lot of narrative spread about him being, just listening to the last person he talks to, and and some of that, like, it is true, but this is because he views things like a CEO. A CEO is going to bring in advisors, and okay, you tell me what you think. You tell me what you think. You tell me what you think. Okay, I like what you said. Let's go with that. Which is that's the way you want your government to operate. Honestly, you want it to operate like an efficient business, because you want it to be provided to you high quality, low cost, and be able to operate efficiently. He's learning from his past experiences. His first time in office, he recognized, especially in retrospect, just how much he was surrounded by disloyal people who are willing to stab him in the back at any cost if it would get them a one-on-one interview for the Washington Post or something like that. And if there's one thing he values, it's loyalty. So when they took a shot at him, it changed everything. That's when the temperature went up really fast, and they realized the actual stakes here. Before that, there was kind of you could say, things are pretty heated and it's unstable and whatever, but all this stuff can change in a very quick hurry. But once you get winged with a bullet, and it's very clear that it was only the providence of God that prevented it from exploding the back of his skull. Like that's the sort of thing that wakes a person up. As you could be as I don't know, as detached from reality or loosey-goosey as you want, and catching a bullet whizzing past your ear that clips you, like that's gonna put the fear of God into someone, and you can tell it's had an impact on him. But that was the point at which Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, Tucker Carlson, a number of people were saying, you need to pick JD Vance, because Vance is not beholden to the old guard. He knows how to play with them. He knows how to deal make, which makes him a good proxy for Trump. He has a reputation for being able to cross the aisle and get stuff done that's like anti-corporate corruption. Mm-hmm. He's willing to work with the squad to get that sort of thing done. And he's also a proxy for these Silicon Valley guys who bring a tremendous amount of capital to bear. Financial capital, political capital, economic capital, social capital. Where Elon and Thiel and Mark Andreessen move, a tremendous amount of the professional world will follow, whether consciously or subconsciously. So it's not just about, there's now a political action committee that they can put money into. And I don't think that's nothing. I think that with all the legal troubles and all the regime onslaughts that Trump has undertaken, he could definitely use some money that would be, he's not having to necessarily draw on his own resources. I'm sure he has assets that are frozen or there's just massive bureaucratic hurdles to trying to release assets and that sort of thing. So getting the money was very helpful. But even more than that was getting Twitter. having Twitter fully backing him institutionally, having the VC world, and there's another phenomenon we've been following, the Gundo phenomenon, which is basically a bunch of young white guys who are super patriotic, super Christian, and are working on building military tech and trying to reindustrialize, remanufacture, or bring manufacturing back. All of that whole swath of potential industry and innovation and energy and money and all of that is assured to Trump if he has the open endorsement and backing of guys like Thiel and Musk and Andreessen and Tucker Carlson, and them having their guy there for Trump now ensures that if they take another shot at Trump, well, now they've got Vance to deal with. And Vance is going to be very sympathetic to these guys because he's close personal friends with them and they're very much ideologically aligned. Mm-hmm. So Vance is a very, very good insurance policy for Trump. He's also a bulldog. And he's a guy who I expect he'll be an activist. He'll be a very active VP who's not just there, like Pence wasn't really doing anything. Mm-hmm. But Vance will actually, like the VP has a pretty big say-so in hiring and staffing the executive branch, which is going to be a big deal. If the onslaught on the administrative state is on the menu, then you want to have Vance's input and oversight there. So the choice of Vance was a very clear repudiation of, and it's like, that's the death knell to the old Republican Party. That Republican Party is dead and gone. The party of Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney and Bill Kristol, like all those guys, they're thoroughly thrown out of the party, and they can squeal and cry and whine about it all they want. They're gone. They're dead and gone. That party is gone, and it's an entirely new Republican Party. Mm-hmm.
Vance's quote, I thought this was overlooked by a lot of people, but his quote when he spoke about how America is a people and it's got borders and it's not an idea, I thought that felt to me like the death knell against neoconservatism, because the entire premise of the neoconservative movement is that we are an idea and this needs to spread across the world by the point of a gun, obviously is how it was done. But when you take someone no, America is a people, it's not an idea, I started to look for who went against that. Now, of course, there's low-level people that just fall for that seemed racist or something. And it's like, no. Watch the quote-unquote elites who are against what he said. And that is the neoconservative spirit feeling like it's kind of swinging in its last gasps of air.
It's interesting. Just as you were saying that, I realized that so you had the neoconservatives who America's an idea is a justification for expanding, taking America everywhere. Right. We're gonna give Iraqis America at the point of a gun. That was the neoconservative angle. Well, the progressive, or whatever you want to call the blue side of the regime, has the inverted effect. It's America is an idea, so everything needs to come here. We're going to bring all the people in here to participate in America as an idea.
Wow. Yes.
So Vance, in repudiating that, was repudiating both of them, because this is like the left hand and right hand that they use to punch you. And he was repudiating both of them in that.
Mm-hmm. And all they've got to say is that he's weird.
Right.
Which was
another. The memes have been so good the last few days. Him like playing video games and
What do you say to, I know the answer to this, but I'm setting it up for you. What do you say to the people, let's say in our circles that are quote unquote black-pilled, which for my audience listening, again, I'm not trying to get too buzz phrasy, but that are pessimistic about the way things are going right now?
There is so many reasons to be optimistic. That's not to say that there aren't bad things happening. There aren't risks. Of course, there are risks and dangers, and we're living in a very significant time. It's a time of great instability, which means I think it's very easy. It's very monkey brain, chimp brain, to say things are very unstable. That means very bad things could happen. Therefore, I'm going to focus on being very afraid of bad things happen. That's chimp brain stuff. It's easy. Anybody can do that. What really sets the human being apart is the ability to say, this is a time of great instability, which means there's great opportunity, which means very good things can happen. And it just so happens that when the human mind is put upon the notion of very good things happening and begins visualizing that, if people begin focusing on, the different terms for this is manifesting or the law of attraction, or it's been kind of woo-woo in the business world and that sort of thing, but it's a very real phenomenon that if you positively visualize good things happening, then good things will start happening to you. And really more accurately, what's happening is that you are seeing the good things in everything that happens to you. So even if a bad thing happens to you, an ostensible bad thing, you get a car accident, or you lose your job, or your bank account gets hacked and drained, or whatever happens, there was a good thing that happened in that. There's a lesson in there. There's a positive. There's a wholesome thing. There's a good reason why that happened, but you have to look for it. You have to find it. And if you do look for it and you do find it, then you can begin chaining this good thing to that good thing, and then to that good thing, and then to that good thing. And eventually you'll realize, hey, only good things happen to me. And it was a subtle thing. It was just a change in your own perspective and like a discipline to look for the positivity, to look for the optimistic take. But as you begin to do that, you'll begin to realize just how real those things actually are. When you were, and this is, I think you've got a large Orthodox audience, and even Christianity at large will recognize that suffering is a gift from God.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
You don't get the love of God without suffering.
Yes.
That's
we're not the prosperity gospel believers.
Exactly.
Yes.
The suffering that you're experiencing is your distance from God. That's how you experience distance from God. You suffer. So when you're suffering, that tells you, hey, this is like a status update. This is a way for you to recognize your position on the map. I think of the like open world video games where like Assassin's Creed or some of these games where you have a little map up in the corner of the screen. And as you're walking around, as you go explore these different parts of the map, it goes from being blacked out or foggy or whatever to beginning, you can see the terrain and the different locations and stuff on the map. And that's kind of what suffering is like for us. And you kind of have like a mental model. The more you suffer, the more you know where you are, the more you know who you are, because you're recognizing your position with respect to the source of all things, to the God who created you, in whom reality is defined.
Yes.
So there's this term that was coined by Nick Land, who's kind of he's like schizo Curtis Yarvin. The term is hyperstition. And it's kind of like a superstition, but it's like a self-fulfilling superstition.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a really valuable concept for people. I'm glad he put a word to it, because how would you say this? 2016 meme magic was a really good example of this. The way that Donald Trump was memed into the White House, this was an example of hyperstition. That people began to believe that he could win, so they began acting as if he was going to win. And something kind of weird and metaphysical happened where people just began to just buy the idea that he was going to win. And the more people who bought the idea that he was going to win, the more they were coming to accept that he was going to win and beginning to prepare themselves to live in the world that involved him winning, which increased the possibility that he was going to win. And you start getting a feedback loop here. Now, the same thing is possible today. And I think the black pillars fall into kind of two broad camps. And it would be the people who think that there's no possible way he's going to win because of XYZ reason,
mm-hmm.
or the people who think he probably will win, but it won't matter because of XYZ reason.
Mm-hmm.
And in both of these cases, I would tell that person, you choosing to focus on that and think about it in that way is increasing the possibility that what you're believing will actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
You may be one little person, but you are contributing to this larger sentiment that only the bad things can happen. This isn't to say you need to be blind to the potential for the bad things. Rather, it's a recognition that, yeah, of course, bad things are going to happen, but good things are going to happen too. And if you want more good things to happen, then you have to anticipate them. You have to believe that they're going to happen, and you have to position yourself to contribute to them happening. And believing that they will happen is a way of contributing to them happening. Because we don't just live in a rigid, linearly temporal, materialistic world. We live in a weird world that has lots of wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff. So you can, if you set your mind to believing that a good thing will happen, you increase the possibility that good thing will happen. And at the very least, you set a baseline for if good thing doesn't happen, I will still see the good things that happen. And I will live in a world where the good things happened. So you could choose to live in the world where the bad things happen or the world where the good things happen. Both of them are going to happen. You're going to have a good thing world. You're going to have a bad thing world. Which one you choose to live in depends on which one you give all of your time and your energy and your manifesting power to.
Mm-hmm. I might regret this. This is going to go down. This is going to be on the record. It's on the internet for a long time, I hope. I think, I'm almost hesitant to say, screw it. I do believe this. I think there's 0% chance Kamala Harris is the president come January, whenever that sworn in date would be. If she were to be, thoughts on what things would look like. And also, let me preface it. Do you agree with me on that percentage wise? And then we'll answer the other question. Okay.
Yeah. Because I think there's a very good chance that she's not even the nominee.
Okay.
And then if even if she is the nominee, I think that there is. Well, I'll give my prediction of what I think is going to happen, and then I'll say the counterfactual. So I think that what's going to happen is it's going to be a redux of 2020, or sorry, of 2000. Freudian slip. It's going to be a redux of 2000. That the election is going to be decided in the courts.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because
this is good.
Because it's I don't. Okay. Number one, the idea that the Trump campaign isn't doing anything, or that the Republicans aren't prepared for election fortification, this is just nonsense. The media isn't necessarily reporting all of it, but it's out there and you can find it. It's very clear that they're building a massive ground game. Scott Pressler is one person to follow for stuff like this, but they're building a really big ground game of door knockers and canvassers and poll watchers and yada, yada, yada. Now, there are poll watchers in 2020, and it didn't really make much of a difference. But 2020 was a very different time than 2024. Trump was not the normalized candidate in 2020 that he is in 2024. Mm-hmm. It was very easy in 2020 to say, the last 4 years have been really crazy, and maybe it's not all Trump's fault, but he kind of does make people just sort of lose their minds, and he's kind of uncouth. And Biden is a known candidate. He may not be great, but we know what we're getting with him, and we just want to get back to some stability. We just want a little bit of normalcy. So when it came down to it, the actual votes themselves didn't really matter that much. What mattered was the collective spirit of all of the decision makers at each little micro decision point. And all of them, when they were faced with a decision, which could have been on a phone call or a text message, or it could have been at any point, they were faced with a decision. Do I act as if Trump is the winner, or do I act as if Biden is the winner? If you notice, everybody just sort of overnight coalesced around Biden as the winner, and the actual mechanism of determining that became irrelevant.
Right.
This is because there was a generalized sentiment that this will be the stable, normalized route, and this is the side that's going to be able to enforce itself the most reliably. If we go the Trump route, like, that's just too much. We have to admit that the elections aren't real, and we have to admit a bunch of these things that are just too uncomfortable to admit. There was still the belief that we could have, it was just a 4-year blip. It was one weird presidential campaign. We're going to get another one in a different administration. Things will be different. The last 4 years have made that very, very clear that that's not the case. And there's been a steady drumbeat for the last 4 years of the corruption and the election fortification and the censorship, and then Twitter being opened up and more people being emboldened and able to come out and actually say what they think and feel and recognize how much legitimate support there is for Trump, and the regime has deranged further and further and further. You have Biden, resigning via tweet from some fake letter, and then Kamala, who's just they're doing the same, like, shelter her in place and not do anything with her, like, all this stuff. Even the political normie, who has the very, they just believe whatever the press tells them. They recognize that things are very, very odd. The DNC is totally in the middle of a civil war. The RNC is completely solidified behind Trump. So, and now you've got major social influences. I mean, picture this: January 2025. There's weird stuff has been coming out about, vote count irregularities and all this sort of thing. And you have Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, Mark Andreessen, and even other major, there will at that point be other major figures we may not even know about right now. There's Bill Ackman, you've got the David Sachs, there will be just banger after banger after banger going out on Twitter, which is where everything flows from, talking about this. In 2020, there was different investigations and audits and stuff that were happening, but it was being suppressed, actively suppressed. Twitter was still owned by the previous owners. There was
a fringe group of people in a way that we wanted to kind of, and then the Kraken and all of this kind of stuff was a little. Right. It was not elite.
Yes, it was weirdos. It was like kind of odd weirdos who were talking about this, which made it really easy for people to just be like, yeah, that's not real.
Yeah. Which
then meant when it came to, you have the Texas v. Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court's like, well, we don't want to be politicized. We don't want to be, 20 years ago, we had the experience of deciding an election, and we've been dealing with a bunch of crap ever since then. We don't want to go down that road anymore. If we have to weigh in here, it's going to cause an absolute, just complete breakdown in social trust and institutional trust and all that. We don't want to go down that road. Now, this time around, if history starts to repeat itself, what is the social pressure going to be on the Supreme Court? It's not going to be stand down and don't get involved. It's going to be if you stand down and don't get involved, that is being politicized. That is making a political decision. So I think that there's going to be so much social outcry and there's going to be so much institutional support behind the idea of, like, if we still want to have elections going forward, if we want to believe that we're a democratic country, then there needs to be an institution that comes in and saves it and gives it legitimacy. So you're going to have military interests, you're going to have banking interests, you're going to have commercial interests. And really, I think what it's going to come down to is an underappreciated thing, perhaps, is going to be foreign leaders. There's going to be significant foreign leaders when they choose to weigh in. It's going to make I don't know if it'll decide the decision, but it's going to play a big part in it. Imagine if Benjamin Netanyahu came out and recognized Trump as the winner, or even somebody within the EU or something who came out and recognized Trump as the winner and said, hey, like we're just going to respect him. Bukele. If you have if a bunch of leaders from foreign countries begin to signal, we're not going to actually have like diplomatic relationship to this person, because it's very obvious that person's not real, doesn't represent the will of your people, and we want a strong, powerful America. We want to be able to, yada, yada, yada. I think that's going to play a big role as well. And I think the only people who would be able to really sway things, who would come out in support of, say, Kamala, would be people who just aren't going to move the needle for anyone. Anyway, so that's kind of the reasoning I've gone through, where I think that this is ultimately going to be decided in the courts. And the social pressure is going to be such that when everyone makes that decision of like who's going to be able to enforce their will more, who's going to be seen as more legitimate, more authentic, which narrative is more believable, they're going to land on the Trump side. If it was the other side, then I believe that we saw a dry run for this a couple months ago with the Texas border dispute. When the federal government came in and tried to throw their weight around at the Texas border, Greg Abbott told them where to stick it. And a bunch of other Republican governors all did the same. They all backed him. And I think some of them even sent National Guard troops down to the border. I believe that was essentially a dry run for what we would see was it to wind up with a President Kamala or President insert Democrat here. I think that you're going to see the only way that happens is through significant fortification. And that's going to be an easy pretext for either a formal or an informal coalition of red states that just begin to take matters into their own hands in terms of governing and maintaining their own states. You've got Ken Paxton and Greg Abbott, who have already signaled a willingness to do this in Texas. You've got Ron DeSantis and a bunch of other people in Florida who are the same way. Those are the big states. All it would take is a couple others to come on board with that, and now you're cooking with steam. So I think that were we to wind up with a President Kamala of some sort, we would be seeing a very quick breakdown in the formal structure of the United States as it is. And I don't think we're going to get a breakdown into like a disappearance of the federal government. I don't think that's ever, I think it's probably going to be at least a century before the federal government disappears. But I think it's going to be rendered more and more of an accessory. It's just going to be kind of toothless, not able to enforce itself. It's very clear that there's blood in the water. If it's very obvious that the only way they won was through fortification, then that's a massive repudiation of their mandate, which just emboldens anybody in their opposition to them. So I think no matter how it goes, we're going to see a more and more, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's like the federal government becoming ornamental, kind of. I think we're moving in that direction either way, but it would happen a lot quicker under a Democrat president, and that'd be the rough road to take. That's not going to be a fun process. I know there's probably some libertarian oriented people who are like, oh yeah, give me that.
Right. Yeah.
But you got to realize that that's the way. There lies war. There lies famine. There lies starvation. There lies massive crime abounding throughout the country. That's what the breakdown of the federal government quickly would look like. I don't think that's I don't think that's a Christian or a libertarian. I don't think you could justify it on either terms. So yeah, the long way though, you got to be patient. The federal government is going to go away eventually, but the Trump route is going to breathe some life into it for probably another 50 plus years.
Interesting. I love this way to end. All right, Matt, plug away all of your shows, your Twitter presence. I know we started with that, but we'll end with that as well.
Yeah. So Twitter is @RealKingPilled. The YouTube channel is KingPilled. It's also on all the podcatchers. I have to say on Apple Podcasts, I haven't been able to get the album art to update. So if you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, it's the old thumbnail. It won't have any of the new branding, but it's still the same show. And then every Monday to Friday, 10 or 11 in the morning Central Time, I do the Astrolib. And it's a 2 to 3 hour
maybe
variety show.
11:15, 11:30.
Yeah, it gets a little later every time. It's like a variety show of tweets and videos and whatever threads, articles that caught my eye. Yes. And we keep up with a lot of these sorts of things.
Whatever bad music I've never heard of in my life before, I catch flack for sometimes. But I call it Mornings with Matt, and I listen most mornings, often if I can. Even if I'm at the gym listening, I'm in the chat. So for everyone listening, I love hearing it every day. And
we also
go ahead.
We have another big project that's coming. That's going to be, we'll say, beyond the show. There's a big project that's coming. I'll tease it here, and I want to talk to you about it as soon as we get off the call here. So I'll drop that as a dirty tease for the listeners.
What a teaser! All right, Matt Erickson, Mr. King Pill, thanks for being with us here.
Thank you, man. It was good to be here.
Yep. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And again, keep me in your prayers. You will certainly be in mine. And next week, let me tease it. Another personal friend of the show and in real life, Scott Horton. I got these talkers, I'm no amateur at this. For my 2 episodes, I needed some good talkers. And you guys know Scott knows anything and everything about foreign policy. We are going to discuss the war between Ukraine, NATO, USA, all the imperialists, the globalists against Russia. What does that entail? How did we get there? Where are we now? And what's likely to happen? Again, I hope nothing happens before that show airs. That's the kind of tension that is at hand right now. Until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow Podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.